What is going on, people of YouTube? This is Big Shy Gaming here, coming at you with another video. I apologize, it has been a while since a video. Anyhow, so today I kind of wanted to go over some ammunition types for some newer players in World of Warships. So I loaded up a training room here and I got a bunch of bots here. First things first, especially in low tier, you got your high explosive right here. That's your hit number 1, and that's what you load in your guns. And then number 2 here is armor piercing, which is good for ships that give you a side of their ship, just like this one. So these bots that I loaded in are basically bots that you would face against regular players. So first thing to know is if a ship gives you a side like this, switch to your armor piercing, hit 2 twice to automatically load. And then aim right by the waterline at the center of the ship to aim for the citadel. See, now I'm angled a little bit. He is at a little bit of an angle. So I'm just going to readjust here just a little bit. Fire again. There, I got a citadel. Now the thing with citadels is the more citadels you get, the quicker you destroy the enemy ship, and that is the ultimate goal. To destroy enemy ships and to capture points, as many points as you can to get your team to win. So that was a British cruiser, and they have a very weak citadel, as you can see there. Now this would be the USS Phoenix, US cruiser, and they are also very weak, as you can tell at the center of the ship. They're very weak citadel there. So all you gotta do is aim near the waterline. I mean, you're not going to always get these kind of shots, especially when they're maneuvering, but if somebody is just going in a straight line like that, you can clearly punish them. See, now we're going to take armor piercing against a battleship here. Tier 4 battleship. Let's see what happens. Look at that, 3 bounces and 1 over penetration. So let's try it again, just same area. Little bit of damage, not very much damage. And again, very little damage. So what you want to do against battleships as a cruiser player is switch to high explosive. Now when you load high explosive shells, they are going to make contact with the ship. Okay, hopefully they'll make contact with the ship. I'm on here. There we go. So you make contact with the ship and a high chance of fire. Now, as a cruiser, fires are your friend. The more fires you set on an enemy, the higher the chance that the enemy ship is going to burn down before he can use his repair ability. Excuse me. Every ship in the game has the repair right here, and then once you use it, it has a certain cooldown time. So, the thing to remember is if an enemy battleship uses it on one fire, you can punish them for that, because as soon as they repair, you wait about 20 seconds, and then you light them on fire again, and they can't repair that fire right away, so they'll burn, and you'll get a lot of damage, you'll get a lot of credits, a lot of XP for that. So now we're just going to switch targets here. Okay, so here's a Kolberg. This is a tier 3, so this would be common for most new players coming into the game. See, now I hit 2 once. As you can see, there's a yellow box that came around the ammunition type. I currently have high explosive loaded. The minute I fire this, AP will be forced into the gun barrels to start reload process. I will show you something here in just a second. Set a fire. Okay, so now it's loading armor piercing. Armor piercing loaded. Fire. See, now the Kolberg has a fairly well protected citadel, so it's not going to be easy to get a citadel on him. So what you want to do, I have armor piercing loaded. I'm going to double tap the 1 to force the guns to reload into high explosive. Causes more damage, you get more hits. The more hits you get, the more damage you get, the more credits you get. Ultimately, the better off you'll do. Okay, so now we'll go to the Svetlana. This is, I believe, the tier 3 or tier 4 Russian. Again, high explosive. Does decent damage. Let's see what happens when we load armor piercing. Come on, a little bit of lag, come on. There we go. High explosive, set a fire. Let the armor piercing load. Right at the waterline, maybe just below. Citadel. So a thing to do is, being as you have access to the tech tree in port, it would be a good idea to familiarize yourself with ships of your tiers so that you can figure out their armor weakness, so you can figure out how to cause lots of damage to them, just like that. Now you're not going to get, like I said, you're not going to get these angles every single time. Excuse me. So it's nice to kind of know. I'm using the tier 4 German ship right now. I like the German cruiser line myself. They don't have very good armor, but they do have a high rate of fire on their guns, and the higher the tier you go, they have pretty good range as well. So let's see if we can finish him. See, he has pretty good armor. So I'm going to aim at the superstructure above the waterline, see if I can cause more damage there. As you can see, it's getting all kind of blackened. After so many shells, that part of the ship can no longer take damage. So we'll move on to the next ship here. So this is the Kuma. This is going to be the tier 4 Japanese ship. I like this ship. However, there is a downside to this ship. It has a big citadel right underneath the smokestacks there. So we're going to fire some high explosive at him. Does okay damage. As a cruiser player, your bread and butter is your high explosive, because you cannot always get these kind of shots. You can be you'll be moving, the enemy will be maneuvering. So if you can get a chance to get that, look at that, 4 citadels. He's almost dead. Now if you get those kind of chances, take them, because the higher, if you can take out an enemy ship, look at that, and we won. So basically that's just kind of showing you, as a cruiser, the goal. Look at that, 23 citadels, because you got to know where to aim. So let's go into the port here. Kind of show you guys, for you newer players, because I am by no means a high tier player. I am about mid tier. I don't have any really high tier ships. Okay, so now you're in port. So you take the tech tree, go to the tech tree tab here, and then on the left hand side you got every nation you can pick from. So good thing to do would be start with the Japanese, because that's at the top. Let's see here, let's pick a tier 4 ship. Pick the Kuma, it's a cruiser. And then on your right hand side here you have armor layout. You click on that and you can scroll out, and this kind of shows you your armor of this ship. And it shows you this yellow part here is the citadel. That is usually, it's so high out of the water here. Let's get rid of some of these others. There, so now it's just showing the citadel, where the citadel is on the ship. And then you can kind of go down here, you can see right where the waterline is. Right in here. So you can see how high above the waterline that is. So that's very vulnerable to all kind of shell types. So if you hit something there, you're going to cause a lot of damage, and therefore force that player to either go away from you or come at you, or force the player to do something, or unless they're just not paying attention, and then they can get deleted from the game by your shells or your torpedoes, depending. I mean, a lot of torpedoes, 2-3 torpedoes at these tiers will destroy a ship. So if you're a destroyer, or a lot of these cruisers do have torpedoes with decent range, you can use that to your advantage. So let's also look at the US. Let's take tier 4 Phoenix. So you go from the St. Louis to the Phoenix. The St. Louis has a very, very well protected citadel here. I can show you. We'll load up the St. Louis. See, look at this. Now we can take away, we're going to take away these top armors. So this is the St. Louis's citadel. As you can see, it is very angled. So in order to pierce that, you're going to have battleship level guns in order to pierce this and cause significant damage to him. Cruiser shells and destroyer shells are not going to do a whole lot to him, especially if he's coming at you like this. Not a very good chance you're going to hit that, especially when you put this little plating here. I mean, that can be overmatched, but nonetheless, it's still a very well protected citadel. Then you go to the Phoenix here. The Phoenix is not necessarily as well protected as the St. Louis, for good reason. It's a light cruiser, so underneath the smokestacks, that's a good good portion of the ship where you can identify where the citadel is. usually right underneath there, or even underneath turrets. The higher tiers you go, sometimes some citadels go almost the entire length of the ship, so it's a good idea to familiarize with yourself with the tech tree and of whatever ship line you decide to go down. Each of them have their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, I could go right off the bat here and I'm just gonna spitball here and just kind of give you a brief summary. Okay, Japanese cruisers. Once you get past about tier 4, you start getting to tier 5, the higher tiers. Japanese cruisers are good at long range. Their guns fire at long range, take a little bit longer to reload, but they have a significantly higher chance to cause a lot more damage. They also have from tier 3 here, from tier 3 here all the way to tier 10, every cruiser gets torpedoes. Something to keep in mind with the cruiser line. The cruisers are like the jack of all trades. Destroyer line. Their destroyers are very stealthy, and until tier 4 here, they usually utilize stealth in order to ambush their targets with torpedoes, because their torpedoes usually have very good range for the tiers, usually 7 or 8 kilometer range. And then once you get to tier 5 here, it kind of splits. One line is torpedo, focused on torpedoes. The other line is focused on guns. I haven't gotten that far yet. Anyway, next would be battleships. What the Japanese battleships focus on, after you get through tier 3 and 4, you get the Congo. They focus on extreme range and extreme damage with their guns. They have very high caliber guns, and they can cause quite a bit of damage if an enemy cruiser is showing you the wrong kind of a broadside. They come out from an island trying to get away. They show you broadside. You cause lots of damage. You destroy him and delete him. Carriers, I can't tell you a whole lot about carriers. The only thing I can tell you about carriers is there's only 2 nations in the game that have carriers right now, which is the Japanese and the US. The Japanese carriers focus, after tier 4 and 5, they focus on heavy bomber loadouts in their carriers, so heavy torpedo bombers and heavy dive bombers, whereas the US, we'll go to the US line right now, the US carrier line focuses heavily on fighters and more planes in each squadron, whereas the Japanese have less planes in each squadron but do more damage. Moving on to the US battleships. The US battleships, they are very slow, whereas the Japanese battleships have quite a bit better speed than the US battleships. US battleships are great for getting in close and brawling, but they don't really want to brawl with destroyers because the destroyers are their counter, of course. Something to keep in mind. The higher the tiers you go, they get a little bit better AA. That's kind of the US battleship theme, is the higher their flavor is to try to focus on AA. Excuse me. However, I mean, it doesn't really take effect until tier 8, which is a very high tier, so something to keep in mind. US cruisers, they focus after tier 5, you get to tier 6, which in my opinion is probably the best tier for the cruiser line anyway, because after tier 3, after you get to St. Louis, tier 4, 5, 7, 8, 7 and 8, they all have very vulnerable citadels. They're pretty easy to citadel and cause lots of damage to. However, like all cruisers are very maneuverable, and the US cruisers, they have pretty decent AA, and they do have a pretty good chance of starting fires. Moving on to the destroyer line. U.S. destroyers are very similar to the battleships in the fact that they like to get up close and personal. The U.S. destroyers have high rate of fire on their main guns, but very short torpedo range, which is just the opposite of the Japanese. The Japanese have very good torpedoes, but very bad guns. So it's kind of a trade-off. It's kind of your choice. Excuse me. Moving on to the Russians, the Russian cruisers. I like the Russian cruisers myself. Once you get to the higher tiers, they all have torpedoes after tier 4. Granted, they're not very good torpedoes. They're like 4 kilometers, so more like self-defense torpedoes. But they are very good. The reason I like the Russian line is because they have a really high fire chance, even more so than the Japanese or the US. They have a really high fire chance with all their shells. Consequently, their destroyer line, until you get to about tier 6 or 7, they don't. Their guns are pretty bad, and their torpedoes are even worse than the US torpedoes. They all have like a 4-kilometer range. I don't really care too much for them, but they are a pretty good brawler. And then once you get down to tier 10 here, it kind of changes everything. Kind of changes at tier 8, which I haven't got to yet. Moving on to the German line. So the Germans, their battleships, I like their battleship lines. Their battleships have what is called turtleback armor, which you cannot citadel with any ship. It's very similar to spaced armor, but they are also very similar to the U.S. and in the fact that they like to get up close and personal and do a lot of brawling, because each nation has really good secondaries, so they could fire secondaries at each other until one of them dies. Let's see here. German cruiser line. I like the German cruiser line. They are kind of fragile, just like a lot of the cruisers are. The thing I like about the German cruisers is they're similar to the Russian cruisers, as they can, at these tiers here, you can sit back at range and fire your guns at a very high rate of fire. Same thing with the Russians. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, very vulnerable citadel. So that's something to keep in mind. But the Russian tier 6, the Budyonny, again, these all have citadels, but the Budyonny is very, very difficult to citadel because of the way its armor placement is. So, again, each nation has its strengths and weaknesses. Excuse me. So, German destroyer line, I haven't really messed with it, but I mean, these first few tiers are actually kind of fun because they got forward-facing torpedo launchers, which is kind of interesting. But the thing with, like, for instance, the German battleship line, the difference between that is they have a little bit smaller caliber guns, so they can fire their guns more frequently. May not cause nearly as much damage, but having the chance to fire more frequently as a battleship is a good thing. Moving on to the British. The British cruiser line. They just recently introduced the battleships. The British cruiser line, extremely fragile, as you guys saw. Extremely fragile if they give you a side of their ship that you can punish really heavily. However, the British cruisers are extremely maneuverable. They are almost destroyer level maneuverability. So that's something to keep in mind. They also get, I believe, at tier 4, they come equipped with smoke screens all the way up to tier 10. So they can throw down a smoke screen to cover themselves, which can be very useful. Moving on to their battleship line. Their battleship line is, when it first came out, it was okay. I never got to actually be a super tester about it, but I have enjoyed the British battleship line. Something a little different about the British battleship line is most of the time when you're in any of these other battleships, you want to be firing armor-piercing shells to cause as much damage to the enemy as possible. Well, with the British battleship line, their kind of flavor, if you will, is they like to, their HE shells do significant damage. Not to say their AP shells don't, but their HE shells are very good. Excuse me. Their HE shells are very good against any ship because HE shells do not care about angling, which is kind of ironic because the battleships focus HE shells, and all the British cruisers, none of them can fire high explosive. They all fire semi-armor piercing, so it's kind of a cross between armor piercing and high explosive. The only ship that does is the Premium Belfast. I do own this one. Other than that, all these ships fire armor piercing, so it's something to keep in mind. Pan-Asia, I don't know. New tech tree coming soon, it looks like. And the French have the cruisers. I don't mind the French too much. It's just they're different. It's a different cruiser line. From my experience with the cruiser line, they have fairly decent armor, surprisingly. However, some of their ships take a fairly long time to reload their shells. 12 to 15 to 18 second reload on some of these shells. That's pushing really close to battleship level shells. Battleship shell reload time. So something to keep in mind. So that was kind of my take on that, and wanted to let you guys kind of know, some newer players, if you want to see this video, and hopefully you found it useful. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys all in the next video.